Everything in order, English?
I think you'll find it's rather more than just in order, sir. You're now entering the most secure location in the
South Pacific.
Thank you to World of Warships for sponsoring this series. If you're unaware, World of Warships is an online free-to-play strategy game where you take control of hundreds of vessels with over 30 million players worldwide. Every ship is realistically recreated from 3D scans of their real-life counterparts to make the game as realistic as possible. There are also weather effects to make each battle unique and challenging, with the game pushing you to focus on tactics and strategy. There are over 200 different battleships and aircraft carriers available across 11 different nations that can be unlocked as you play, including most of the ships covered in this video series, so you can follow the series by playing the ships discussed throughout the war. World of Warships is constantly updating the game, so there is always something new to do. Click the link below to play World of Warships and collect a special bonus starter pack. New players can register with the code Potential History Ships of War to receive 1 million credits, 250 doubloons, a Hosho aircraft carrier, and 3 days of premium time.
Okay, so
Pacific Series Part 3. After the embarrassing defeat at Midway, the Japanese, rightfully so, told their nation of the defeat and doubled their carrier-producing efforts, readying for the oncoming battle. Nah, just kidding, they lied about it. The battle at Midway was reported to the Japanese public as a crushing victory. Survivors returned to the mainland under secrecy and were not allowed outside contact. Those not wounded and still able to serve were sent to backwater posts or the Southern Front meat grinder to control the information of the defeat. According to Parshall in his book Shattered Sword, even Emperor Hirohito and the Inner Circle were not told the full truth until several days after the battle, and the extent of the loss was concealed from the army, with a special cabinet minister assigned to control what information was released, to whom, and when. The official story was 2 Japanese carriers were lost for 2 US carriers sunk. And even the Navy was lied to, with only Kaga and Soryu taken off the ship registry, and Akagi and Hiryu left on official lists but labeled as damaged and prevented from having men assigned to them. The war was far from over, though. The US made its first offensive move at Guadalcanal to capture a vital airfield to keep the Japanese from threatening the supply route to Australia and become a stepping stone for further operations. And in the waters surrounding the landings at Guadalcanal, the Japanese Navy was able to take some revenge for Midway. Early in the battle, Admiral Mikawa of the 8th Fleet attacked the American naval group off the shores of the island that was divided into a northern and southern force commanded by an Admiral Turner. Turner heard news of Mikawa heading his way, but the information was late and incomplete, leading him to think the Japanese wouldn't attack overnight. However, Mikawa did, something that the Japanese Navy had become pretty proficient at. With only 2 destroyers on watch, Mikawa slipped in between them and attacked the fleet on partial stand-down in Condition 2 readiness. Mikawa approached at 1:33 a.m., launching torpedoes before the alarm was sounded on the American ships, in coordination with Japanese planes dropping flares illuminating the US ships. He defeated the southern group in 7 minutes with multiple US ships knocked out and no Japanese losses. When turning north, he unintentionally split his force, which actually worked to his advantage in surrounding the American ships. One of them, the Astoria, was told by its captain to stand down, thinking early on that the Japanese attack was friendly fire, really highlighting the confusion of the American ranks. And the force itself went down as quickly as the previous one did, with the Japanese turning off their searchlights at one point because the US ships were burning so brightly they were no longer needed. 4 ships of the whole American force were sunk throughout the following hours, with another one, the Vincennes, being all but sunk and useless in any further efforts, with the Japanese in return only losing 35 men and no ships, going down as one of the worst defeats in US naval history. Afterwards, Mikawa wanted to turn back and hit the landing transports, and if he did, he really could have ended the Battle of Guadalcanal right then and there. But with only an hour of nighttime left, he was worried he would have to face US carrier planes come the dawn. Ironically, the carriers were leaving the area, and if he had decided to, he could have destroyed the transports instead of playing it safe. And some people criticize him for this, but as we have seen and will see in the future, playing it safe is something the Japanese naval commanders often tend not to do, and it's usually to their detriment, so with the information he had, he really made the right call. This was the first of many battles fought in the Greater Solomons area, though. I'm not going to go through each one, as that's not my thing, and I'll leave links below for those whom it is, but through the following months to the end of the campaign, there were no fewer than 5 major naval engagements, where the Japanese lost around 8 ships, including 1 light carrier in the Battle of the Eastern Solomons. and having a fleet carrier and a light carrier be damaged in the Battle of the Santa Cruz Islands on October 25th to 27th. The Japanese ships, including 4 carriers, thinking the Army had been able to retake Henderson Field from the Americans on Guadalcanal, ran into the USS Enterprise and Hornet, which was sunk in action. The Japanese won in a tactical sense, sinking more ships, but lost in the strategic sense as the Americans were not pushed off, and of their 2 remaining carriers after the battle, one of them was returned to Japan, leaving just 1 Japanese carrier in the fight. The Enterprise was the only American carrier left in the field as well, but Henderson Field had been serving as almost an island carrier during the surrounding battles, and had remained a thorn in the Japanese side, giving the Americans an advantage in what looks like a 1-to-1 carrier battle. There is another factor, though, throughout these carrier battles that leaves the Japanese at a significant disadvantage from each engagement that I've touched on yet. American carrier planes trained on a kind of universal system so that every pilot could be assigned to any carrier and work off it, so the pilots could be assigned to different carriers, and planes that were lost in a battle could be easily replaced. The Japanese, however, didn't do this. They trained their fighter pilots in carrier groups to work on a specific carrier, so that every time planes were lost in battle, it would take extra time to refit that carrier to full strength, as the pilots had to be assigned and trained. And at this point in the war, that's not so much a huge problem. As for the Americans so far in the Guadalcanal campaign, it's been kind of touch and go. And it is especially now, with the Enterprise being the only carrier that is still in the battle, able to support the invasion in the water surrounding. And it will take a second for the American industry to get online and begin pouring out the ships and planes as we're used to, but the Japanese are already on a system that does not react as quickly as the Americans. Even if they could produce ships and planes at the same speed as the US, they would still be slower to produce results in the field due to this bureaucratic hiccup. By the beginning of 1943, US manufacturing will finally begin to get as to what we think of as World War II production, and this will only put the Japanese in a more desperate scenario, and this is why I'm harping on these carrier losses. It may not seem like a huge deal right now as the Americans look like they're in pretty dire straits, and in some ways they are, but with what's coming, the Japanese are never going to be able to catch up, even with this lead that they have at the moment. On December 31st, 1942, Emperor Hirohito gave his troops permission to withdraw from Guadalcanal, the island the 2 giants have been fighting over for nearly half a year, involving even more fighting in another major naval engagement. The Americans are often faulted for not moving to cut off retreating Japanese forces, but on the ground, it looked as if it may have been an attempt to reinforce the island, and it was not clear that it was a retreat until pretty much the last moment, and because of that, exercise caution regardless of their overwhelming force. For the Japanese, this was an unfortunate loss, and it served to harden their resolve. They could no longer go any further south, but the command closed ranks and decided that this wouldn't happen again, that they wouldn't lose further islands in this manner and harden the defense. But it's really a lot bigger than that. When the Japanese started the war, they had hoped to quickly knock the West out of it, have them refuse to fight, and then take the raw materials from their conquered territories in the south, and then use it to fuel a final victory in China. And yes, this would be a rather roundabout way to shore up materials even if their plan worked. But instead of it working, they had opened up a second front on top of the one they were already fighting against the US, the world's largest economy. And to them, Guadalcanal may have been very far away from Japan, and the Japanese there felt that they were still in relative safety with the Americans being this far off. But Guadalcanal was definitive proof that Yamamoto's plan of knocking out America, leaving Japan free to do as it wanted in Asia, had been solidly proven to have not worked. As with Guadalcanal, the Japanese had lost the initiative, and would now see themselves on the defensive to keep their holdings, and not have the same thing happen again. The Americans, though, had just found a template that worked, and realized they didn't need to push back the Japanese from all the places they had occupied, they could just drive a wedge straight to the heart of the empire. And we're soon going to have the warships and the aircraft to support something like this. And with the Japanese army so overextended, not knowing which island was to be attacked, there was no good way that could prepare for this strategy that was coming up on them. The war was still far from over, but the way in which to end it had been found.
Thank you to World of Warships for sponsoring this video. If you're interested in the game, be sure to check the link down below. And as always, thank you to my patrons on Patreon for their support of the channel. I have a few old school type videos planned for the upcoming month, and I'm looking forward to sharing them with you all. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.